Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to dive into something that'll really make you think?
Always.
Today we're going to crack open the Old Testament, the book of Hosea, specifically Hosea 1.2.
Okay.
You ever heard of it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Um, it's one of those passages that tends to make people a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not your typical Sunday school story.
Not at all. We're talking spiritual adultery, a marriage scandal, the works. Really gets you thinking.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Who is this Hosea guy?
So Hosea was a prophet, a messenger of God, and he gets this, well, pretty crazy command. God tells him to marry a prostitute.
Whoa, okay, that got my attention. But I'm guessing there's a deeper meaning here, right?
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just about some scandalous marriage. Think of it as a living metaphor. God's trying to show the Israelites just how much they've hurt him, how serious their actions are.
Okay, I can see that. But to really understand this, we need some context, right? Who are the Israelites in this scenario, and what's their relationship with God?
Right, so the Israelites, they were God's chosen people, bound to him by a sacred covenant.
Hold on, covenant. Could you break that down for us a bit? What does that even mean?
Sure, a covenant is like an unbreakable promise, a bond built on love and loyalty. It's serious stuff.
Okay, sacred promise. Got it. So what did this covenant involve?
Well, God promised to bless and protect the Israelites, to be their God, and they were supposed to worship only him and follow his commandments. It was a two-way street.
Sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
It was. But here's the thing. The Israelites weren't exactly holding up their end of the bargain.
Oh no. What were they doing?
They were straying from the covenant big time. They were worshiping false gods, which was basically like saying, see ya later to everything God had promised them.
Ouch. Yeah, it's gotta hurt.
Exactly. And that's where this whole marriage metaphor, this act of spiritual adultery, as it's called, comes into play.
So by marrying a prostitute, Hosea was acting out this betrayal, this unfaithfulness, so the Israelites could see the pain they were causing God.
You got it. And it gets even more intense when you think about what a whorehouse represents. Broken promises, love, and intimacy being bought and sold.
It's like their whole relationship is just a business deal gone wrong, instead of this sacred bond it was supposed to be.
Exactly. And remember, this covenant with God, it was supposed to be the foundation of their entire society, the source of their identity, their blessing. Way more than a bad business deal. Their whole identity came from this covenant with God. It was the source of their blessing, everything. And here they were turning to these false gods, rejecting everything God stood for.
Right, yeah, it's like this huge slap in the face when you think about it like that. But it's kind of hard to wrap my head around, honestly. Like, we're not building golden calves in our backyards these days, are we? So what do these false gods look like in our world now?
That's the million-dollar question right there. And it's where this story gets really relevant for us today. We might not be bowing down to statues anymore, but we've got our own versions of false gods, don't we? Things we put above everything else in our lives.
When you say it like that, it's kind of obvious, huh?
Totally.
Money, power, fame. They all
Yeah.
get caught up in that stuff sometimes.
Exactly. And it's not always that in your face either, right? It can be anything that starts to consume us. You know what I mean? Anything we let define us. Our careers, relationships, even our desire for comfort and security. All that can become idols if we're not careful.
So it's less about the what and more about the how much, I guess. Like how much we let these things take over our lives.
100%. It all comes down to what we put at the center of our lives. What are we really living for? And this whole spiritual adultery thing, it's not just an individual thing either.
Wait, you're not talking about the church, are you?
Well, yeah, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the Israelites, the church can get caught up in chasing worldly success sometimes. And it often happens at the expense of its true calling.
So instead of being this like beacon of light, a place where people can connect with God and their faith, it becomes...
It starts to look a lot like that whorehouse we were talking about before. A place obsessed with appearances, more focused on wealth, status, fitting in. All that instead of spiritual depth, authenticity, a genuine connection with God.
So instead of challenging the values of the world, it starts to reflect them.
Exactly. And that is a dangerous path, let me tell you. When the church chooses comfort over courage, conformity over conviction, it loses its voice. It can't speak truth to power anymore, can't offer a different way of living.
Wow. That's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But it's also a good wake-up call, right? Makes you stop and think about your own life, what you're prioritizing, where your trust is, where you find your hope, your identity.
It really does. And it begs the question, what idols are we unknowingly worshiping, if we're really being honest with ourselves?
Yeah, it's like we're surrounded by these shiny distractions, right? tempting us to focus on them instead.
It's a constant battle for sure. But the book of Hosea, it doesn't just leave us in that pit of despair. There's hope woven through this whole story. This call to return to that deep love that we were created for.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we even begin to break free from all these modern-day idols and get back to that place of real faithfulness?
It starts with recognizing those idols, right? We gotta be willing to look at our priorities, our habits, and ask ourselves, what's really driving me? My decisions, my desires, even my fears.
So it's about honesty, I guess, even when it's tough. But then what? What happens after we face those hard truths? What's the next step?
Well, then it's about actively choosing to realign our lives with God, putting Him at the center, making Him the foundation for everything else.
That makes sense. But how do we actually do that in a practical, everyday kind of way? I mean,
Think of it like this. Every decision we make, big or small, it's an opportunity. We can either move closer to God or further away. Are we making time for Him? Prayer, reading the Bible. Are we surrounding ourselves with people who support our faith?
so it's all about those daily choices, huh? Making sure they reflect where our hearts really are.
Exactly. And yeah, sometimes those choices are hard. It might mean saying no to things that the world tells us we should want, things that look good on the surface. Because we know deep down they'll pull us away from what really matters.
It's like we have to be so careful guarding our hearts and minds all the time, always thinking about where we're investing our time, our energy, our love.
You got it. And honestly, that's why this story, as crazy as it seems, is such a gift. It reminds us that we can't just coast. Spiritual faithfulness, it's not passive. It's about making that choice over and over again to put our relationship with God first.
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation, I'm not going to lie. It's definitely made me rethink what it means to live a life of faith in a world that's constantly pulling us in different directions.
It's a journey for sure. But remember, you're not alone in it. As you figure out what those idols are in your own life, those things you might be tempted to worship, just know that God is right there with you, offering His guidance, His grace, His love, always there. Such a good reminder. So for our listeners out there who are ready to take that next step toward deeper faithfulness, what's one question they can ask themselves today to get started?
Here's one to chew on. What's one thing I can change starting today that will bring me into a deeper, more real relationship with God?
Such a powerful question. It reminds us that faith isn't about checking boxes or following rules perfectly. It's about cultivating that deep love for God that changes everything. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deeper into the heart of what truly matters.